We're ending on something that is really important to contextualize all of the work that you folks are doing here in this room, and that is ethical approaches to research collaborations with Indigenous communities. I am very, very proud and delighted to introduce Shannon Dames, Chair, Nurse, and Professor at Vancouver Island University. And also Jimena Chalchi, a researcher as well. Thank you.
Hi there. I feel really fortunate, humble to be able to speak to this topic. If you would have asked me even a few years ago if I could have spoken to bridging Indigenous and Western ways of knowing, I would have broken out in an immediate sweat, and I am still breaking out in an immediate sweat. But it's a really important topic, near and dear to my heart. So my name is Shannon Dames. My work background is I serve as a nurse. I am a descendant of Norwegian, German, and British ancestry. I'm a proud mom of 2 neurodivergent tweens, and I'm a life partner of 20 years. I also serve as the chair of Vancouver Island University Psychedelic-assisted Therapy postgraduate program. It's a year-long program up in Canada, the first to offer a comprehensive service or program with a practicum as well. I also serve as the Research and Development Director for a group therapy program that focuses on psychedelic adjuncts with group therapy. And we call it a community of practice, whereby we very much believe that we are wounded in relationship, and in order for us to heal those wounds, we are healed in relationships. Not just any relationships, not those we pay for support to get, but those that come with unconditional positive regard. A very common construct coined by Carl Rogers, a seminal psychologist and researcher. Really want to just applaud the talk before this, and felt a lot of resonance with what we're doing up in Canada as well, recognizing the power of working in a community environment. We're a very individualist society, and many of us here in the West have been nurtured, conditioned to believe that we are alone. We got to fight this out for ourselves. This idea of a collective community, being part of something, being one with something, is very foreign to most of us, and it takes a lot of years and immersion to be able to kind of come together in a different way, and psychedelics are a very powerful way to expedite that process. I'd also like to just acknowledge the land that we are standing on right now, which is a big part of what we do up in Canada, working with reconciliation. I'm coming from the Snuneymuxw First Nation, Coast Salish tradition, and here I would just like to acknowledge the many tribes who have made their home along the Columbia River, including the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, I'm going to try my best to pronounce these, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalupuya, and Molola peoples. Feeling very humbled and lucky to be invited here on these lands today. I also want to acknowledge that our first territory, I feel like I'm hiding behind this podium, and I kind of am. Our first territory is, I think, our body, the one territory that we do have governing control over. And these bodies, we are often, I would say most of us in the West that have been conditioned here in this individual society, we often kind of walk around like we are a head with no body, recognizing that it is through these bodies that we connect to the world, and it is very much acknowledging the emotions and sensations and how we move and connect together is an important part of that. One of the practices that we start with is a very simple practice in the Roots to Thrive program for our group therapy, is really working with reconciliation. Like, what does that mean? We talk about cultural reconciliation. It feels like a big construct, and it gets pretty academic, and it actually causes a lot of barriers and overwhelm if we really look at all of the history. There's a lot of shame and anger and all that we still have to work through. And what I do know with my own personal experience is that we will never heal from the mind. We will never heal from opposite sides of the fence. We heal by coming to a collective table, in relationship. We heal by becoming friends, no matter what culture we come from, no matter what ancestors we flow from. We will reconcile through friendship. And that starts by reconciling with our own bodies, which many of us here in the West have spent decades violating. We are at war with our bodies on a regular basis. We are often trying to biohack and optimize our bodies to be able to do and achieve what we need them to do to be successful in the society. So I guess this is my opportunity to say, I think as much as I'm going to talk about some heady material, and Jimena as well, it really does come down to that acknowledgement, not just of the land that we're standing on and the first peoples who have been stewarding this land, but also this territory, this vessel that is carrying our spirits and our souls. It is very much the first step toward reconciliation. Thank you. Okay, so I'm sharing a little bit as a bit of an intro. I'm going to pass the ball here to Jimena, who's going to talk a bit about a cultural framework that we're working up with the NCPR Center for Psychedelic Research in Canada. We are a psychedelic learning system, and I'm not going to read these slides off. I'm going to talk a bit over them. The idea of a learning system is that we are in, it's not an emerging field, because in the last couple hundred years, we have developed a sickness system, which we all live in. We are in a sickness model, which means you don't really get these medicines unless you have a sickness. And for many thousands of years before, we were not in a sickness model. We were in a wellness model, and you could actually take these ceremonially for all sorts of different reasons, not just because you have an ailment. So with this re-emerging system in the West, because of how quickly things are moving, because we have crisis on top of crisis, we do need to move fast. Not in a state of urgency, because this is where we go to our mind and we start stubbing our toes and making all sorts of relational mistakes, but in a state of compassion and responsible action, where we are pairing research, education, and service delivery together in a three-prong approach, really working with partners across the board to be more efficient in how we translate knowledge to the front line of particularly education and service delivery. Our biggest mistakes would be that we stay in our silos both professionally and culturally. What we are trying to represent is a multi-eyed seeing approach, where we are coming together as practitioners, researchers, wisdom keepers, stakeholders. In this, we are all friends, equals, doing this together for a common cause, what Elder Geraldine Manson, our program elder, calls Natsimat, walking together with one mind and one spirit. And we will only do that when we lay down our weapons and come together with a common intention and initiative to bring something different to the world. I'm going to credit Jimena for coming up with this the Celtic knot here. It's actually a really good example of what we are trying to do, and it also really represents unity and connection and interdependence of the different prongs among us. This Celtic knot is also really representing a multicultural approach in that it is translated, depending on what culture you come from, in a variety of ways. So there's not just one way to look at it. It also represents the need and importance of these three prongs working together and translating knowledge as quickly as we can. A big part of this is service delivery, which is where we started, the Roots to Thrive program. It's a nonprofit program that was developed through the Health Authority and the university with this idea of we are going to make mistakes. We are making mistakes. We have made mistakes. We will likely keep doing this for a number of years. In our culture, with the amount of perfectionism and competition that we carry, it is very common for us to try and hide those mistakes, dampen them, cloak them, you name it, We need to be the kind of people that stub our toes. We know we're going to stub our toes, that we, rather than canceling each other, really mobilizing knowledge as quickly as we can, as widely as we can, so that we can all collectively learn, reduce harms, and optimize benefits as quickly as possible. We are a big fan of working in groups. In individual therapy, which those of us in the individualist societies usually prefer, because vulnerability is very difficult in these, and our bodies generally tend to be allergic to vulnerability. It tends to feel very dangerous. However, through vulnerability is healing. And when we step into group therapy environments where we are compassionately witnessed by a group of equals, not somebody that we're paying, but people that are there to be there to support us with shared intentions and agreements, very similar to the folks that were speaking before us. It is incredibly powerful, the amount of transformation that can happen. I'm whipping along here because we're going to be a bit short on time, so I'm going to keep going. Our results through Roots to Thrive have been exceptional. We've actually done a study, even after this one, with both generalized anxiety, PTSD, depression, and life work functionality has been significantly improved through the group therapy process. We also ran a study with group therapy without medicine and group therapy with ketamine. And this data actually represents ketamine-assisted therapy. There's a publication noted on the bottom if anyone wants to go into more detail. When we did this head-to-head with and without medicine, the results were significantly similar, or quite similar, which was surprising. However, they were all traveling together. Those of us that have been offering medicine-assisted therapies for a while now know, just by being in it, how impactful it is, particularly with the rigid ego structures that we have developed in our more neurotic society here in the West. I will claim I am very much among those. These medicines are very helpful to kind of break through those really rigid ego structures. And those who were in the medicine were working alongside those who were not in the medicine, and that kind of energetic transference, where the relational facilitation benefited the entire community, whether or not you were taking the medicine, which I think was a really substantial finding as well. Again, we run an education program trying to translate as quickly as we can the service delivery, toe stubbing, and optimization into the education program, along with the research that's happening internationally. We've got a lot of new data coming out. I also want to, Jimena is going to talk about the NotSmart Center for Psychedelic Research. It is a bridging of Western research, clinical trials, observational studies with Indigenous research. And as much as we in the West have a definition of research that looks protocolized in a very, I would say, relatively rigid way for good reason at times, and maybe not so much at other times, there's also Indigenous research as well, which is like years and years and years of oral transmission of learnings, which is also incredibly important, and I would say even so much more powerful than what we are getting in our sterilized research environments, and we really need to take that into account. Clinical trials is not real research. Most people would be excluded from clinical trials that are in the general population. Most people have more than one comorbidity these days. They do not represent a diverse population. They are in a more sterilized environment, not naturalized settings. So we are getting a snapshot of what these medicines do. We are not getting a comprehensive approach. And I'm going to pass the ball to Jimena, so I am not burning into her time. There you go.
Hi. Do you listen? Yeah. Okay, I'll do this. Hello, everyone. I want to introduce myself. I'm very new in this world. I'm just coming out of jungle and all that. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge the land and ask permission to the heart of the sky, the heart of the land, to your hearts, to the heart of the wind, to be able to share wisdom, and to the heart of the fire that has kept us together as humanity through all these years. I would also like to acknowledge the spirit of the sacred children, or the big mycelia network that has been here present all day. And to all the medicine that you have in your territory's body, I say hello to all the plants and molecules. And I really want to acknowledge the effort that every one of you have done to take care of this territory, the first territory, to take care of the people that you are working for the earth, and for everyone. So thank you for that space. And okay. So what I'm going to talk about is research we did, and I'm a very big fan of participatory action research and action research, which is something that happens ongoing. So I just had the idea to do a scan with all of you, like scan today, how this community is like understanding the knowledge of indigenous peoples and like all this stuff. So I will be doing questions, and you can say me, no judging, just scan for those who want to participate. Okay, so this research was also participatory action research where more than 30 people participated, indigenous researchers and mixed people. And it had 3 stages. The first stage was realizing that, yeah, working with indigenous people is so conflictive, right? Like, I'm working with all these minorities, like, so much conflict there because we don't have a stewardship plan. Ancient, like, peoples and all, like, ancient cultures had a protocol for sharing. So this is what we did. We did a protocol for sharing. And the second stage was, what does this protocol look like? So we came together to clarify the intent, like, why are we joining together? What are your values? What are my values? And how we're going to create this space of sharing. And then the stage 3 was the creation of a relational leadership and research ethics framework for the Natsamat Research Center. So stage 1, here I want to speak about the multiple icing approach. So who has heard about 2 icing approach? Okay. If you want to look around, 2 icing approach is the most known theory and framework known today to bridge knowledge and work with indigenous cultures and research. So I totally recommend you to jump sometime when you have time, 2 icing approach, Elder Albert Marshall, and you'll find lots of info about that. But the 2 icing approach comes from this perspective of people who live in between indigenous worlds and Western worlds. So you have 2 eyes, right? Like, you have all this kind of what I am, right? Like, I have all this academic training, but also all this like traditional knowledge training. So we have this perspective which bridges. But when we are talking about multicultural teams, like we are now, we need a multiple icing approach. And we're not talking about only people. We're talking about all the relations, right? Because for indigenous peoples, all this healing work is not only for humans. It's for the earth, for the animals, for the water, for the wind. That's why we call them. So when we work for all the relations, not only for humans. And this multiple icing approach implies bringing those voices. Bringing the mushrooms voice, bringing the ayahuasca voice, the hikuri voice, or even like the molecules voice. What do they think about what we want to do? Like, are they okay being synthesized? Are they okay with that? Have you asked? They might. I see that the mushrooms are pretty much like wanting to participate. But I think we should be respectful and ask. So this is the multiple icing approach. I don't know what it is. So some other considerations that we had to go with: professional humility and cultural humility. So the case is, what is more valuable, a PhD or an elder? Where is the value? The sense of value, right? What are we putting in the center of the research? What is the sense of value? And cultural humility, who said like one culture is better than the other, or that my idea invalidates your idea. Like, why can't I have one cosmovision and you another? It's like Sawok principle from national peoples. You have your creation story and that makes sense to you. Why should I break it down to put my story that makes sense to me? So that's part of the multipolarizing approach, cultural humility. And this is important because when we work with other cultures and indigenous peoples, we have to go all the way to the sense of value. What is health? Like we're doing health research. What is health for indigenous peoples? What is health for the Western culture? And Shannon just said, like we are in Western culture, health is like trying to get there to the health, to this standard of what is health. And for indigenous peoples, health and wellness is like a more interconnected concept. I am not fine if my river is not fine. I'm not fine if the mountain is not fine. I cry if they go and cut the tree. By the way, acknowledging the old, big, old growth trees that sustain this building. Because in the structure of this building, there are ancestors, trees. So I salute the house too. So all of that, right? Different approaches. So we decided that we needed some relational protocols. And these protocols was different, right? Because, well, these indigenous people have certain kind of protocols. But then you go 2 miles there, and they have different protocols. We were just thinking about, where do you give the word, like to the left or to the right? And like, I don't know, left, right. No? So some people say to the right because they have a whole story about it. Others say to the left because there is a whole logic and story about it. What is valid? Both. Why not? Like, that's kind of the flexibility that psychedelic fractal vision gives. Everything is there. Personal connection, also very important. So we started this like with personal gatherings in person. Another very important fact is indigenous cultural safety. Who here have heard about indigenous cultural safety? Just a few people. Okay, thank you. Indigenous cultural safety, it's a whole framework of ethics that indigenous people have created. It's a whole story, but Irapeti Ramsden, who is a Maori New Zealand nurse, she developed this framework and principles and guidelines to work with indigenous peoples called indigenous cultural safety. And it's based, cultural safety is based on respectful engagement that recognizes and strives to address power imbalances, aims to create an environment free of racism where people feel safe. And here I'm going to stop. Do you feel this place is safe? Yeah? No? Hands? Yeah. It's safe, no? So I also want to acknowledge Horizon's team because you've made an amazing safe space where we can speak of this psychedelic thing without like fear, right? So thank you acknowledging that effort. But what about someone who comes from literally the jungle, who have never been in this environment, whose ceremony is like just a blanket and the bottle of ayahuasca, and drink and the whole thing opens? How do you think they feel when they come to a conference like this and step into this? I don't think they feel safe. Well, for sure they don't feel safe, that's what they say. Because to start with, we work in circle. This is very intimidating. I felt intimidated coming here, but I am used to this. And I agree in my intention and sense of value to participate. But other indigenous peoples don't. And that's not safe. Because that fear brings a lot of the trauma of colonization back. So just stepping in one room like this, knowing the story of the tree that is behind this and how that tree was gotten, it's not safe. So how can we create safe spaces? Cultural humility is the first step. First of all, Really, all cultures are very wise, ancient cultures. Even the Western culture is very wise, like it's powerful. Look, all that we have been doing and creating. Well, I'm not going to get into there. So, anti-racism. That's another very important approach. And the anti-racism approach means constant awareness on biases that we have, microaggressions, challenging, preventing, and avoiding that. It's like racism was implemented into the culture through colonization, was one of the main tools that colonization used to separate people. You are indigenous, I'm not, so we're not friends. And that's what we are facing as generation today. Like, did someone of here came in a ship and did the thing? No. Neither the ancestors, like, no. We just inherit those biases. And also those habits. So there needs to be like an ongoing practice. And as Shannon said, like, we will have plenty of mistakes. And I normally have a lot. So what they did, for example, this is another example of a group of researchers doing indigenous cultural safety frameworks. And they did this round, it doesn't look so good, but they put together all the 3 nations, values, balance, caring, like this is how they start. This is how we start, we sit in circle, we say, like, what's the sense of value? What is valuable for you? Oh, for me, interconnectedness. Oh, for me, industry. Like, let's see. And let's see how we can put that in a table to speak together. The reference of this amazing framework is here. I 100% recommend it. You read that article, very up to date in indigenous cultural safety. So, since all of these means culture, sociology, leadership, like it's a indigenous attempts to do like intercultural research is transdisciplinary research. We need teams of different things, right? So I have a training as Onanjabo with the Shipibo people. I love it. But I cannot practice because of legalization and all that. So, okay. So I decided to go to leadership. So now I'm a master in global leadership for planetary health. So how we are doing all this movement, for whom, or like just to be happy, or go be happy, feel well, and go shopping, or go feel happy, feel well, and go heal the river, because that's the main discussion here between indigenous and non-indigenous peoples. Like all this effort, all these mushrooms, all this medicine, all these millions of dollars. What for? Just to make people feel healthy? Or like we can go one step forward and make all the relations feel healthy? Because these medicines have the power, we know it. That's why we're here. These medicines have the power. And we can do this because we already have the fractal power. So all of that is what we need to do. So then we go to stage 2 of the research, and what we understood is like, okay, like, so how are we relating here? Like, we know that we want to be happy, we want to be healthy, we want planetary health, we want collectiveness, we want interconnectedness. Okay, how we do it? How can we share without appropriating, right? Because there are some cultures who are like really extractive, and some others who are like really open. And normally, historically, there has been like a unbalance there, of taking. So the first in the top is what we call bridging. So each one of the circles is one culture, no? So culture A, B, C. When we bridge, it's like, what we do is like, oh, what you are saying is similar to what my story says. Or like, for example, the flood story. Like there is a bridge between cultures that even make us think like, oh, maybe there was this mother culture like some million, thousands years ago. Then we bridge, or like, oh, your plant does the same that my molecule. Let's bridge it. Right? It's like just bridging. The other is blending, which happened, for example, with online education. Like we blended all this technology with education, and we have this blend called online education. Or what happens a lot in pharma, naturism. No? Oh, I go to that place, I see this beautiful plant, I see all these people healing with the plant. I blend it with my technology, I do my capsule. That's a bridging. A blending, sorry. But we saw that these are kind of appropriative. It's very easy to have, this is like a good recipe for problems, right? Because then I go take the plant and my recipe goes famous. But I didn't really ask them if they were willing to plant the plant for the rest of their lives and put all the fields because the plant only grows there. And then we have to take out the forest because we need more plant. So it's, in the future, is a recipe for problems. And bridging also. We were just speaking yesterday about cosmovision. No? We were talking about archetypes, the archetype of Jesus as the archetype of love, and how other people like really think that Jesus is real. I'm not saying anything, I'm just saying like those are the two positions. We can bridge it and say like, oh yeah, it can be or it cannot be, it's just bridge, it's the energy of love, it exists. But what happened with somebody who really says like, no, come on, like, he is a person. And the others are like, no, come on, that's an archetype. And the other is like, come on, it doesn't exist. And then we just get in trouble. There is the bridge, but there is trouble. So then we came to this other that we found in many other traditions, which is the third space or the safe space, or the space in between. In these third spaces, what we do is I bring myself with all my lineage, all my knowledge, everything I have. And you bring yourself with all of that. And what we do here in the center is I'm not taking yours, I'm not taking mine. We are putting in the center what is the value of that practice? What is the value of that methodology? What is the value of that medicine? And then we take the essence, and we all agree to share that essence. And then we take it. So then, for example, what happens here with the smudging, right? That's a classical example. If we blend, like if we bridge, we will say like, oh, your copal is like my sage. We're bridging. They are not the same, but you can bridge it. Then another say like, oh, let's do a stick like the Indian sticks with sage and copal, right? Smells good. That's a blending. But the third space is like we're thinking like, you know, in my culture, sage does this and that and that. And the other say like, oh, in my culture, copal does this and this and that. They are not similar. However, what we can conclude from this is that the smoke is the important part. So why is the smoke so important in the psychedelic setting? What does the smoke happen? And then we can bring the science and, okay, check the molecules of the copal and this, right? And then you come and have fun. And then we can have this amazing research saying like, well, copal is good for this and this and this, so if the patient gets really sad, then you give copal, and then they will be feeling better. Or if they are feeling like very high, you give some sage and the medicine goes down. Why? I don't know. That's why we want to work together, right? With the science. So we did a safe space where we worked with a AQAL model. I don't know if you know it. It's integral theory, Western theory. And this is the result. It's very complex. But people came together, we spoke about it, we spoke about what is important for you, what do you feel unsafe from the other cultures, what do you feel safe, what do you would like to see. And we checked it like in the I, in the it, in the we, in the us. And we came together to that, to go to the third stage, where we said, after all that talk and circles, we decided that we cannot work in a Western typical structure of leadership. So yeah, again, fractal technology. We are rooted in the BIU University, but they are leaving us total freedom to have our inner leadership. And this leadership was inspired in frameworks coming from Aboriginal peoples from Australia and the concept of deep listening. That there's a whole research of Kelly talking about relational leadership and ancestral leadership. So there are two facts important here. First of all, to evolve in our consciousness about what is happening in between nations, we need time. Like it took 500 years, so let's just be patient and work for future generations first. So it's ancestral in that sense, like we bring the knowledge of the ancestors and we think in the next generations. Second is relational. What is more important is the relation, because that is what is like the problem, right? The lack of relation. So it's a relational, we are focused on relation, how we build better relations. And then in the center, like around, like to protect ourselves from our colonial extractive minds, because we all have it, we have the Wisdom Council, which is formed by will be formed, we are still forming it, 7 indigenous elders who will help us to just don't hack ourselves in the colonial mode and try to be like aware of everything that happens, like the awareness eye. And then we have these 3 positions, because we also have to look at budget and time availability and all other work. So we have the memory holder, which in this moment is me, because I lead all this research, but when the time comes, I will have to keep all the memory to someone else. Reciprocity steward is the one that will be taking care of all the relations happiness, right? Are you feeling fed? Like, said that there is no feeling of extractivism. And the collaboration enabler, which is the person who will go and work with other research, because this framework is not only for our research, this framework we are offering for everyone's research. So if you want, like you can call us and we can bring our team who is already like prepared and work with your research, we just go and apply the framework. Otherwise, you can use it, or we can help you to create your own, whatever. But the thing is that we work with different research. And then the people who go to work with the research, we have the learners. So we changed the name of research, because for Indigenous peoples, that's a very scary name, right? Because of what happened in the history around health research with Indigenous peoples. So we call them learners. And we have 7 kinds of learners, and the team is shaped by 7. One is the learner, like, which will be, if I bridge it, will be the PI, principal investigator. Then we have the seer, who is the one who is looking at all the system level invisibilities. We have the includer, who is in charge of being sure that everyone's opinion is being listened and included. We have the cultural steward in charge of protocols. We have the storyteller, who will do the knowledge translation and communication according to the protocols. The custodian is more like in charge of policy, regulation, bylaw, and all of that. And the messenger is the one who is sharing knowledge. So those are the people who will be going to do the research. And what they are guarding in the center is the 3 baskets of knowledge, which is another indigenous method to categorize the flows of knowledge. A long story, but another of the aspects that was super important for us to consider is the inclusion of spirit voice, ancestors' voice, and medicine voice. So we are including the mushrooms voice, the ayahuasca voice, and even the molecules voice in the research. Like they are one person, one relation that we have to respect and acknowledge. The same with the ancestors, right? And the question is kind of like, okay, you say that, but what would your grandmother say, or what your grandfather say? And keep that continuous work. And then that's how we work. Like, that's the third space. And I would just jump to this one because it's more complex. And this is the final ethical research framework. So you see, there is our leadership model there. The listeners community are holding the third space. Then in the center, when we gather together to do research, we call it the knowledge ceremony. And we opened it as a proper ceremony because we're going to exchange knowledge. It's very sacred because it took us all of our life to get there. Then we are basing also on other indigenous theories. So the knowledge ceremony implies change. Every ceremony brings change for everyone. Little one, not so much, but brings change. So we know that when we do research with indigenous peoples or other cultures, there will be a change process that is better to be designed. Because if you leave it like just flow, it can go wrong. So all the change process needs to be designed. Like, what do you want to change in the community with this research? What do you want to change on Earth in this research? What do you want to change in your life? All these levels that needs to be considered. Then we are using like the Western theories that we are using. We call them inclusive theories, and are more like justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, decolonization, intersectionality, social and leadership theory. And all of that just to protect the space for indigenous peoples to work. Right? All of that is just to let them work, to feel safe. Because they don't have to worry to comply with the CIHR and FDA. Just do your research. We have a team that will take care of that outside of the circle. But for now, and then we can have these important conversations who will shape the design of the inquiry, of the questions, of the parameters of the research. Like, whatever happens in the circle, it goes to the clinical research. There is a process of translation, right? So, like, maybe like including the mushroom's voice or including the plant's voice. Maybe with a ceremony, with that intention, and if 6 people in the ceremony say like, nah, what I saw is that it's a no, it's a no. Or if it's unanimous yes, like, well, we just go. It doesn't mean that it will affect the clinical trial or it's just the decision that we are taking of how we're going to take care of the relation with the plant. The plant is okay, we go. Not that we don't go, because we're not going to have the blessing. There will be problems. We don't want problems. We're doing all this because there are so much problems. I'm going to get trapped there. And the same with the ancestors. Like, there are channels, Ubuntu research from Africa. So they are like doing research with ancestors in the sense that they put a medium in the research. And this medium start channeling the thing, and they just write down and include that in the research. So all of that can be done. What we can do with this, we can design questionnaires, we can design, we can design the clinical trial with all these opinions. And then we can include easier the people, because they will say, you know what, like, yeah, good, that question, if you do it, all the elders will get really mad. You don't want the elders mad. So change your question. And then you can do safer inquiries. No, sometimes the nation is not ready for certain research. Like, you can want to go and say, like, we want to finish with depression. Like, we are not done with grieving. And for us, depression is not even a concept. Like, it's a state where the spirit is trapped. And they are trapped there. Like, what are you talking about? So that community not ready for depression at all. Leave them. We need to leave indigenous people space to heal from all the devastation our cultures have suffered. Leave them a space. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for sharing this important work with us. I feel like I left my pen somewhere else, and I was like frantically trying to like redraw that diagram in my mind.
It's in the website, don't worry.
A lot of our audience is really concerned with cultural appropriation, right? So, you know, how do we both honor Indigenous communities and traditions without appropriating? And a related question is, you know, the microaggression that is cultural appropriation. How do we collectively deal with that? For example, the sort of appropriation of shamanism or the inappropriate application of that. How do we deal with those problems?
You want to go?
We probably, it is such a pleasure to work with Jimena. I'm just going to say that. And such a pleasure to have developed a friendship with her. And it is on the foundation of how we do this, it needs to be built on friendships. For a lot of my life, this truth and reconciliation effort has been like in Canada, it's been a big deal for a while now. I think we're a few years ahead of the here in the United States, and there's a lot of shame around, you know, and white people shaming white people, and a lot of blind spots as a conditioned white person that doesn't have a lot of connection to the body and feeling, you know, this need of not enough. There's a lot of temptation to go and see something that's like, oh, that works. I don't have a lineage much because, you know, I don't know where I come from. I don't have my own traditions to create the rituals that actually create safety and predictability in these environments. So it is very tempting when we are not in relationship to go and take something because I will speak for myself and many other Westerners, I don't think it applies across the board, but we are trained to objectify. In research, objectification is the gold standard. And in cultural safety, objectification leads to appropriation. There's a big problem there, and Westerners, particularly as a researcher, I have been trained to objectify. I go and take knowledge, I put it in papers, and I don't know where it came from, or I might put a person's name there, but I don't know that person. I'm not in relationship with them. I have taken knowledge and used it for my own purposes without even thinking about the source. In Indigenous culture, you would never take knowledge out of relationship with the source. So as we learn how to come into relationship with ourselves, like with our bodies, and then with each other as friends, we are going to be far less likely to objectify and take practices out of relationship that are not in relationship with the person that we are receiving them from. So I think that's how we do it. We develop relationships. And I think a lot of the shaming comes from non-Indigenous people on non-Indigenous people. I think, from my experience, elders have been the most gracious in terms of like managing our blind spots. And we can learn from that grace too. If we make a mistake with a friend, they can kind of like punch you on the shoulder and be like, come on, really? You know, and it's like, oh yeah, thank you, got it. You know, like if Jimena's kind of like, you know, that like, didn't feel good, I can receive that from a friend because there's love between us. If she's a stranger that is just throwing shame at me, I can't actually digest it. We develop this othering and it repels. So I think that's how we do it, is it's in a place of safety in relationship. We have blind spots, let's just admit it. We're gonna make mistakes. We are going to inadvertently appropriate. People aren't doing it in a malicious way. They just don't know better. And we learn in a safe space.
Thank you. Well, I would add some theory, Indigenous theory, and now I remember the name of the author who created this amazing book, very important research ceremony, Sean Wilson. And he explains, together with other Little Bear and other authors, the difference between Western culture relation with knowledge and Indigenous people's relation with knowledge. And this comes from the discovery doctrines and other colonial structures. So for Western approach, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, okay? I don't come from that judgment. I'm just trying to understand how we can get along better, have better relations. So this Western approach believes or like starts from the principle that knowledge is something you can get, obtain, buy, acquire, and discover. It's an object that I can get. So I see knowledge, I'll just get it. Like there's no more because there's no other relation. Like everything is mine. Like my Cosmo historic says that Earth is for me to use. So I'm just gonna do that. And the relation to knowledge is that, like we can have it, possess it, patent it, write it, like, private property knowledge. When we go to indigenous communities, knowledge is something you access. It's not yours to keep or share. You access. And you can access through different ways. One is lineage, one is ancestors, one is nature. So you go and learn and you absorb what you have learned. And that is your gift, right? If you go to a ceremony with indigenous peoples, you will see amazing stuff and methodologies and technologies happening. If you really want that in your center, contract the indigenous people. And let's start the work of bringing back indigenous knowledge to the social tissue. And let's start healing that social tissue of earth. Bring the indigenous people, but please make a safe space before. Yeah.
I just want to say one quick thing as an example. Tobacco, for example, as a non-indigenous person, I would love to work with tobacco in more than I do, and I have asked Jimena and another elder around how can I work with tobacco in a good way, knowing my lineage is not, and it's like, well, why don't you use tobacco as an offering? You can, sprinkle it as an offering on the land. But it really isn't appropriate for me to be working with tobacco in the same way that some of these elders are that have trained for years in a protocol on how to work with tobacco, right? So it doesn't mean that the essence of that plant can't be worked with when I understand it and in a relationship with it. It just means that there's a respectful protocol that I follow so that I am in alignment both with the plant and with the culture it comes from. So it's not black and white, right? And we feel our way through that in relationship with the knowledge holders.
Yeah. And that can be challenging. You have your friendships, you have your elders that you're in direct communication with, which a lot of folks don't. And there's so much desire for advocacy and allyship, but for a lot of folks, there aren't those direct elders or aunties or friends to go to. So how do we go about, that work of allyship when we, especially in this sort of psychedelic space, how do we go about making those connections and building those relationships so that we can start to work with those tools and be in right relationship?
A really good start is knowing where the heck we come from. A lot of us that have immigrated to this country do not know our lineage. And a lot of us have really rich lineage and tradition and rituals that, before people came over here and we kind of cut off those relationships, there were rich traditions. And it's a really good start to just start looking back. Where do you come from? What land do you come from? What traditions are familiar to you? Did your ancestors work with crystals? Did they work, and from there, at least it's a start. It's self-locating, right? And that's that translation of this culture's practice. How would that be translated by my people? And how does that come out authentically out of this being based on my lineage? Recognizing not everybody, it's like indigenous peoples are all over the world, right? Like I also have ancestors that were indigenous people. So we go and connect to those indigenous people in our lineage. We don't necessarily need to go and learn from another lineage and need those practices. And how would you say?
I think when we talk about it, we go to one of these very dark holes that we can see in the medicine. It's like, oh, it's a scary one. because there is a lot of intergenerational trauma there for Westerners and settlers. Don't forget that Western people are coming from 2 world wars and from the Romanic Empire. Like, Europe was colonized 1,000 years ago. And what we have, that sterility of relations of elders, is like, it's because they were killed during the Inquisition. There are no elders there. And we need to work through these medicines and go through all these loopholes to gather with them and have a conversation and relearn what we have forgotten because we were colonized. My paternal lineage is one of the last indigenous peoples from the Hispania, kicked out from Spain 2 generations ago because, Spain colonized Spain itself. Like, there were indigenous peoples there. So we all come from colonization in different levels. So as closer you are from the war itself, the more like, you say like tentacles the wounds have, as farther you go from the wound, the more sterile it is. Right? So we have to dive into all those realms and build a relation with the ancestors, with the lineage, do the intergenerational trauma work, which indigenous people are doing amazing frameworks, contract them, and do your intergenerational trauma, because you will find out, like just talking about the Second World War, all the atrocities, right? So there's where we start. And then try to understand that indigenous people, they still have it. They're trying to keep it safe. So help them to keep it safe. Because,
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us. The beginning seems like a perfect place to end. So thank you so much.